You lived an entire life before the age of 3. Think about it. You were born, you opened your eyes, you heard your mother's voice, you tasted food, you took your first steps, and you said your very first word. And you remember absolutely none of it. Not a single second. Most people just assume, well, the answer's simple, right? Your brain just wasn't ready yet. You were too young. But actually, that is not quite right.
The real answer is far stranger. And honestly, it's a little terrifying. Because your baby brain wasn't failing to record your life, it was recording everything. Your memories were absolutely there, but something actively destroyed them. Back in 1905, Sigmund Freud became the very first person to put a name to this whole phenomenon. He called it infantile amnesia. But what exactly went in and wiped the hard drive clean? Let's dive into this explainer and find out. Level 1. The proof. Okay, so first we have to dispel a very common myth. The idea that infant brains are simply too weak or undeveloped to record memories in the first place, it's completely false. Babies can and absolutely do form memories. We know this for a biological fact. In the 1980s, psychologist Carolyn Rovee-Collier ran this brilliantly simple experiment to prove it. She tied a ribbon from a baby's ankle to a mobile hanging above their crib. Step 1, the babies quickly learned that kicking made the mobile move. Step 2, they literally loved it. But the crucial part is step 3. When she brought those exact same babies back days later, they remembered. They started kicking immediately. Even 2-month-old infants could hold that memory for a couple of days. And 6-month-olds, they remembered for weeks. So infant brains can absolutely learn, store, and recall. The memory was saved, but by adulthood, every trace is gone. So why? Level 2, the hardware.
Well, for decades, scientists couldn't fully explain where those early memories went. But the first piece of the puzzle is purely structural. Deep inside your brain is this small, curved structure called the hippocampus. Basically, it's the engine of memory formation. It takes a lived experience, say a birthday party or a walk in the rain, and encodes it so you can replay it later. Now, in adults, this works perfectly, but in infants, this system is severely underdeveloped. The connections are literally still under construction. Specifically, there's this key region called the dentate gyrus, which acts as the literal gateway for new memories, and it isn't fully wired up until somewhere between ages 2 and 4. So your infant brain could form short-term memories, it just physically lacked the cables to move them into permanent long-term storage.
But that is only half the story. A structural delay is a neat, tidy explanation, sure, but it doesn't explain the sheer violence of the memory wipe. It turns out the structural excuse is just the beginning of the mystery.
Level 3. The Paradox of Growth. In 2014, 2 neuroscientists up in Toronto, Sheena Josselyn and Frankland, proposed a hypothesis that sounded, well, almost absurd. What if the very process that builds your brain is also the exact weapon that destroys your memories? The key to this is a process called neurogenesis. In the first few years of your life, your hippocampus is producing new neurons at a completely extraordinary rapid rate. It's just this massive explosion of growth. And it's entirely essential, of course, because those new brain cells are what wire up the circuits you're going to use for the rest of your life. But Josselyn and Frankland suspected this rapid growth came with a highly destructive cost.
You see, every time a new neuron integrates into an existing circuit, it physically disrupts the connections that were already there, the very connections holding your earliest memories. They actually proved this in mice. When they artificially increased neurogenesis in adult mice, those adult mice started forgetting things they had just learned. And when they artificially slowed down neurogenesis in infant mice, those babies actually held onto their memories much longer than normal. The physical integration of new brain cells actually overwrites existing memory circuits.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this. Your baby brain wasn't too weak to hold memories. It was just too busy growing. The exact same explosion of new neurons that built your brilliant mind also completely overwrote everything stored inside it. Your earliest experiences were lost because your brain kept aggressively tearing down the old walls to build new rooms.
And honestly, what comes next is even stranger. We've looked at the hardware and we've explored the biological paradox, but now we have to escalate this story to a totally bizarre psychological twist.
Level 4. The missing self.
Scientists call this next concept autobiographical memory. This is the specific kind of memory where you can replay an event in your mind and you implicitly know that the event happened to you. But to form an autobiographical memory, you need a critical, foundational piece of software. Think about this uncomfortable question for a second. How do you remember a story if there is no main character? To remember that something happened to you, you first need to understand that you exist as a distinct person, separate from the rest of the world. You need a continuous sense of self. You need a narrator inside your head. And, well, infants simply do not have one.
Psychologists Mark Howe and Mary Courage proved this using the classic mirror test. You basically put a dot of rouge on a baby's nose and sit them right in front of a mirror. Before roughly 18 months of age, babies treat the reflection like it's just another child. They don't reach for the mark on their own face. But after 18 months, they do. They suddenly recognize that the person in the mirror is them. This exact moment, the literal birth of self-recognition, tracks perfectly with the earliest possible age that lasting memories can begin to form. You can't remember being a baby because, psychologically speaking, there was no you yet.
The skeleton of memory. But having a self still isn't quite enough. To truly package experiences into permanent lifelong storage, we need one final tool: language. Developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson discovered that language doesn't just describe our memories, it literally structures them. Look at the difference here. Before you can speak, your experiences are encoded as raw sensory impressions: sounds, textures, flashes of light. But without words, those impressions are like water with no container. They just wash away. Once you have language, and especially when adults start having conversations with you about the past, asking things like, "Hey, remember when we went to the park?" you start to build a structural framework. Language literally gives memory a skeleton to hang on to.
And this isn't just some theory. Psychologist Ki Wang at Cornell found that the starting line for memory literally shifts depending on where you're born. In Western cultures, where parents constantly narrate their children's lives, memories start around 3.5 years old. But look at the Maori of New Zealand. Their oral tradition places extraordinary emphasis on personal storytelling, and their first memories reach all the way back to age 2.5. Meanwhile, in some East Asian cultures that focus slightly less on early individual narratives, memories tend to start closer to age 4. The culture you grow up in physically shapes how far back your brain can reach.
So what really happened to the first 3 years of your life? Well, it was a perfect storm of biological and psychological forces. Your hippocampus was unwired. The violent flood of destructive neurogenesis physically tore through the memory circuits you did manage to build. You had no concept of a self to anchor your experiences to, and you had no language to give those fleeting experiences a framework. It wasn't just one thing, it was everything, all at once, wiping the slate completely clean. Which leaves us with a terrifying but fascinating biological reality. Every single human being has a black hole where the first years of their life should be. But since you had no continuous narrator and your brain physically destroyed its old circuits to build new ones, is the baby in your old photos actually you? Or is it someone else entirely? Someone who lived in your body but whose mind was systematically disassembled neuron by neuron and completely destroyed just to build the person you are today. Keep that in mind the next time you look at a baby picture.